why I love you, Ken, because the show that you did, your segment, not taking anything away from any of the other players, any of the other comments made on the Rogue Money end of year show, year-end show, but your segment was forward-looking and grounded in such a way and tied together two or three different elements that, quite frankly, most people don't see. Not even myself. I mean, and I'm not saying that I'm some kind of, great analyst or anything like that. I'm just saying that you see things that a lot of people don't see, which is why I really respect the work that you do and really gravitate towards you. And I'm very, very grateful that, I have Ken Shortgen Jr., the Daily Economist, as my first interview of 2018. This is setting a very high bar for the year, in my opinion. I'm very glad that you're here.
Happy New Year, Rory, and always good to be here, especially since it's going to be about 74 degrees here today.
Oh, dude, you're just bragging now. I'm looking at like 6. I got a baseball score over here. It's not really a temperature. And I want to start, Ken, if you don't mind, with Maduro and Venezuela. Yesterday I was swapping emails with Dr. Warren Coates, who is the former chief of the SDR at the IMF. He was the chief of the SDR development from between 1973 or 76 and when he retired in 2003. He's now doing some other projects for the IMF, but I'd written an article and he had commented on it, and he and I wound up swapping some emails, and I'm going to talk to him in a couple of weeks on the phone, and hopefully we'll be able to record it. But anyway, Maduro down in Venezuela has announced, as you're well aware, the El Petro, and Maduro last week just said that, yes, we are in fact going to bring this to market. And now it seems like China has said, well, we need to rush this yuan oil benchmark contract to market in response to that. What do you see between the El Petro crypto backed by oil and gold and what's happening with China's yuan benchmark, oil benchmark contract?
Yeah, the compatibility between the two. I'm not really sure if one is being synchronous with the other, because Venezuela is not a BRICS nation.
Right.
Venezuela is an OPEC nation that has decided to coordinate with Russia in regards to the nationalization of their oil production, as well as renegotiating loans. But Russia hasn't fully gone in to support the Maduro regime. And so when I first saw the Petro, I had to ask the single question: if this was any other country besides Venezuela that's in hyperinflation and the people are protesting against the government, if it was any other, then I think it would be legitimate. But what happened a week before Maduro came out with this Petro? The military overthrew Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe. And what Zimbabwe and Venezuela are virtually mirrored right now,
yes,
in hyperinflation and in corrupt government. The only thing that had been sustaining the Maduro regime is the fact that he had about $2 to $3 to $4 billion in hard currency to pay his military. But that's been hemorrhaging. And I think he knows that once he's out of cash, the military is just going to turn on him and kick him out. So he desperately needed something to function. Since he defaulted on U.S. bonds and U.S. debt, he's now going to not be able to borrow money either from the IMF, from the U.S., or any of the Western financial institutions. So he's doing this scheme of the Petro. Now, like I said, there's another country out there that is also going full cryptocurrency and digital. As a matter of fact, they allow digital citizenships, and that's the country of Estonia. A place like Estonia, had they come out with this resource-backed cryptocurrency, I would have said, you know what, they're doing it because they're innovative and they're forward-looking and they're doing it for a real purpose. I personally think Maduro's doing this as a political move to hold himself in power in the hyperinflation, because once he loses the last of his hard currency reserves, it's over. It's going to be another military coup.
Well, he's already defaulted on a payment, on a gold interest payment for a loan against his gold. So as far as their hard assets, they're already in question. Or am I wrong?
You're wrong in the sense because they still sell oil on the open market. So they had, up until recently, when they decided that they were going to sell oil outside the dollar, in August they had $10 billion in U.S. hard currency. So they're still just using that to sustain and get along.
Okay.
But that is going down. They just can't. They just can't do that because there has been a sort of not full sanctions, but sanctions on that, and that was one of the reasons why he decided to sell oil in a different currency. But the problem is that the production out of Venezuela, thanks to them nationalizing all the U.S. Companies that were doing the production, as well as the fact that they, in hyperinflation, haven't been able to really produce anything, not of any substantial means. They haven't been able to get a revenue source. That's why they've had to borrow everything. Now, moving over to China, it's interesting because I just wrote an article this morning adding on to the Tax Reform Act. I suddenly came to a realization this new Tax Reform and Jobs Act that was passed by Congress and President Trump is not just a tax cut bill. It is actually an international, it is foreign policy and a trade scheme. Why do I say this? Well, in Europe, where is most of the offshore money from U.S. corporations at? It's in European banks. Matter of fact, I think 75 billion is in Ireland alone, which is Apple's money of their hundreds of billions of dollars cash. Most of these banks in Europe have been sustaining based on these deposits of foreign cash. What happens when all those deposits get pulled out? They can't cover the leverage. They're already insolvent anyway. So you take hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars out of their system, and you have the 2010 European liquidity crisis in an instant. And that's why Europe, the EU, said it was unfair that the US would be cutting taxes. Well, it's even now. China, I saw in December a little article in the Shanghai Daily. China, immediately after that bill was signed, temporarily suspended taxes on foreign companies for their profits that reinvest in China. Because China knows that these companies now can take their money and go to the US where the taxes are going to be less. So China instantaneously had to cut their taxes on these companies to make sure that they remain in China. So it's a foreign policy and trade move, as well as a tax cut for the American people.
So, and the foreign policy aspect is bringing all the foreign funds home, which directly impacts the economies where all this cash is parked at.
Right.
Like you said, Ireland.
There's something big that's happened. What has happened to oil since the rate hike? Oil is suddenly, it ended the year at $66, and we can take in consideration the protests that are going on in Iran right now that drove the oil price even higher today. But the fact of the matter is, one of the predictions I made, and I think I did that on the Rogue Money show, was that we're going to see a return to commodity price inflation around the world, because the growth that is coming is, yes, it's a combination that's going to happen from the tax reform and the tax cuts, but it's also the fact that the monetary expansion is finally coming home to roost. And a lot of that money is going to be moving around. The money velocity is going to, once money velocity starts moving a little bit, boom, we see high inflation. All that inflation that the Fed said has been covered up, that's going to hit just like it did in 2010 when oil was $150 a barrel, when corn was at all-time highs in the futures market, when every other commodity was at all-time highs, when gold was at $1,940. That was all commodity price inflation in the midst of a great recession. Go figure.
That's what we're going to start seeing this year, I believe.
Exactly. And what do we have? The Saudi Arabia and the UAE just announced this morning that they're going to institute a VAT tax. So you have a number of these countries that have been hemorrhaging, and instead of lowering taxes, they're increasing taxes. So they're going to fall by the wayside. Contrary to liberal and progressive things, lowering taxes always stimulates economic growth. Lowering taxes always stimulates economic growth. And the fact of the matter is it's always been about envy. Just take a look at what the governor of New York, Cuomo, came out and said. Oh, this is just a political move by the Republicans against the Blues. No, what it is, Cuomo, is that California, New York, Illinois, New Jersey, you overtax your people, and now all of a sudden it's going to be laid bare that the problem is with you and your states, not with the federal government and their taxation policies.
Yes, that is, and all of those states are going to implode. And you and I, in the states that we live in, which don't have those draconian tax structures, are going to become safe havens for all these people. I mean, where I live in Tennessee, and we're already seeing it. I mean, I got people moving here from California every day by the busload. I mean, it's
And
unbelievable.
think of the political ramifications, because you know what? Colorado used to be a red state. And they've had an influx of so many people from California over the past decade that now they voted for the Democrats in the last election. You're going to see a switchover. Texas is suddenly becoming a quote unquote purple state. They only voted in Trump by 5%. So you're starting to see a lot of these former solid southern states. Georgia, it took forever for Georgia to make the call in the election because there was so much Democratic vote that's been moved in there in the Atlanta area, et cetera. So you're seeing a demographic change, and you can see a lot of these. Now, New York, it blows my mind how these people can live under high taxation and vast price, how much the cost of standard living is. But I've always said Michael Savage is right. Liberalism is a mental disorder.
Yes.
It's a religion.
As Mark Dice says, find a cure. Find a cure.
Whether it's North Korea, whether it's the trade war that the U.S. is doing roundabout against China, the U.S. has decided, the Trump policies or the neocon policies, combination of both, are deciding that we're going to be more isolationist and try to hold on to that unipolar reserve currency system. Either way, China is going to implement their oil contract, one-denominated oil contract, I believe, before the end of January.
Yes,
it's already been tested. It's ready to go, and they realize that Jim Willey's had some recent interviews here at the end of the year, and he believes that it's not going to be a matter of China trying to destroy the U.S., the China-Russian coalition, the BRICS, but it's going to separate the world down the middle. There's East and West. They're not going to mess with Western's financial setup and infrastructure. They're just going to do their thing on the East. The key, of course, is going to be Europe. Are we going to see a divide in Europe where half the countries move into Beijing's camp? Well, guess what? The France economic and finance minister today said we need to start building a bridge to Beijing through Moscow.
Oh, my.
So France is ready to move over. Germany, you can tell by the loss of power of Merkel, they're tired of these sanctions, and they're going to move to Russia's camp.
Well, they've said that for a long time. I mean, they've been upset over it since day one.
Exactly. The key thing is going to be the southern European countries, the pigs.
Yes.
What are they going to do?
Well, I
And
mean,
Greece
Cyprus,
is stupid. Greece has been stupid, and they
right?
should have left the EU. They should have defaulted on their debt, and they should have
Yep.
said, "Hey, Russia, bring your Turk Stream pipeline through us,
Yep.
pay us revenues, and rebuild."
Well, see
But
now, hold on now, because I remember when that happened, and that's when Victoria Nuland showed up at Prime Minister Tsipras' front door and said, "We're going to have a private meeting." And that's when Tsipras was saying, "We are going to default. Period. We ain't paying another dime." All of a sudden, there's a knock on his door, and the private meeting happens, and he comes out and he says, "Well, maybe we're not." This was just after having conversations with Russia and China, because both nations had, or Russia in particular, Russia was being very forward about uh, wanting Greece to come into the BRICS. I mean, they invited them into the
exactly,
BRICS. So, and they said, "Well, we can't do that." And
yeah.
it's
And see,
like, well, okay.
two things. Exactly when you said that. Guess who resigned?
Uh,
Finance Minister,
right.
Varoufakis. He
Exactly.
said,
This is a
Cyprus
lie.
is yeah." The other key thing is, why is Greece important? Greece is important because, according to EU charter, anytime there's a major policy that takes place, it has to be unanimous voted. And if Russia could have gotten a foothold into Greece, they could have manipulated the EU going forward by just simply uh, vetoing every single negative aspect that the Fourth Reich, as I like to call the EU, wanted to bring about for its single continental nation of states.
Yeah, it's yeah. That whole thing is a joke, and it seriously needs to go away. It needs to be disbanded. Before we get too far away from it, Ken, I want to Iran, color revolution, organic. What's happening with Iran?
I don't have any inside information on it, but the way that it sprung up as quickly as it did, I believe it's a funded Western NGO type thing.
That's what it looks like. I mean, because like you said,
It's color revolution, yeah,
it wasn't
pure and
there one
simple.
day, and now it is. Go ahead.
Especially since a couple weeks leading up to it, Israel was jawboning about overthrowing the regime, and Netanyahu desperately needs a win um, in the Middle East, especially against Iran, their quote unquote longstanding enemy, as corruption charges are about to be filed against him. So he's about to lose power. His key thing, I think he knows that he's out as president or prime minister, but he wants his political party that still runs, to remain in power to keep things going. Now, I talked about the fact that Iran, even if you go back to that kook Ahmadinejad, if you look at the speeches, if you look at the actual words, very rarely, ever rarely, did they use the word Jew. They want to annihilate the Jews. No, they wanted to annihilate Zionism,
Right.
the political movement that led to the breakup of the Ottoman Empire in World War One, the creation of these nation states, which European colony, turned into colonies, and then the Western influence for Iran for all those years with putting in the Shah and the sanctions, of course. So it's always been about the political movement of Zionism. It's not been a thing against hating the Jews, because in Iran, even under the mullahs, the Jews live without persecution.
What's happening in Iran, I think, is all contrived. I think that it is nothing but theater created by the CIA. I think that that's, it may not be the CIA, but it is Western financed uh, chaos, which that's what we do.
Well,
That's one of the,
they need to be careful, because just like Syria, Iran has a military pact with Russia.
yes.
And if this gets out of hand too much, and it's proven that there is foreign intelligence, the Mossad, MI6, the CIA, if it's proven that there's that type of influence in there, then Russia's just going to move into Iran. Iran's going to invite them in. Boom. And now all of a sudden you have Russia sitting on the borders of Israel. And we already know what happened when Putin called Netanyahu in and sort of bitch slapped him and said, "You're going to stop this." And Netanyahu, ceded to that. He knows where the bread is buttered in the Middle East.
There you have it. We can only hope that happens again.
But what it's going to do, of course, is it's going to keep the turmoil going.
Right.
The geopolitics of the Middle East is all about this new paradigm shift, moving away, OPEC and that moving away from the dollar, the petrodollar.
Yep.
Because it's ironic. Qatar is already trading in yuan in many instances. So why isn't the U.S. getting going nuts about it? Well, the U.S. has a military base. Matter of fact, the largest base in the Middle East, and so they are good. They have the fear that they're good. Like Qatar could do a Turkey and pretty much kick them out of their own base and move into Russia's camp. So they have to tread lightly with Qatar. They already are in support of Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, in this move. And you see this by the fact that Saudi Arabia is suddenly making peace overtures and coordinating with Israel, because Iran is the last linchpin in this entire thing. If Iran moves fully into Russia's camp and China's camp, then it's going to see the breakup of all of OPEC. That's what they fear. Yeah, but I think it's inevitable anyway.
Yeah, I do too. I think that the moves that Russia and China are making right now are going to assure that happens probably sooner than later.
Ever since 2013, Russia, China, and the BRICS have been planning things out.
Yes.
It's been step by step. They've been very patient.
Yep.
Everything that the U.S. has done has been in the Western intelligence services has been reactionary.
Yes.
The Kiev, Maidan coup. What's happened in Iran just pops out of nowhere. The same thing with what's going on in Saudi Arabia and the whole breakup. The Western cabal is reacting to everything, and as such, just like in Syria, they're making major mistakes because they haven't planned these things out.
Right.
And that's what has made the BRICS, Russia and China, much, much stronger. And when everything is laid bare with the West, especially for the fact that we were, funding and arming ISIS as well as Israel, once the world all sees that, then more and more countries get disgusted with the U.S. and they start moving voluntarily into the Eastern coalitions,
which is already beginning to happen.
Pakistan.
Exactly, it's already beginning to happen.
There.
Right. Gold and silver. You mentioned the BRICS. It's been a couple of months now that Russia and China announced that they were, or it's been more than that, but Russia and China are going to assist the current other BRICS nations, being India, Brazil, and South Africa, and help them to acquire more gold. They're going to do this by opening up a BRICS gold market, one in Beijing, one in Moscow. Moscow and Beijing are already trading gold through the banks from Moscow to Beijing. That was going on all through 2017. Now they're going to take it to the next level and begin helping these other nations to increase their gold stockpiles.
Right.
Is gold coming back to it's already on the table. Is it coming back to the monetary system in full view?
It's not going to be the gold standard that we think.
No. I don't think so either.
But gold is going to back something. I mean, think about this. Let me preface what you were saying, and I'll answer the question in a second. But let's take what has been really the theme of 2017. Cryptocurrencies.
Right.
And the blockchain. Now, I have been a proponent just based on the fact that coincidences don't happen in politics.
They don't happen
Um,
anywhere.
you know, you and I both published an article on the fact that there is a white paper that's at MIT. It's not some obscure database. It's at MIT
Right.
that was written in 1996 by 3 members of the NSA about encrypted money. And if you do a word cloud of that document, you find the words bit and coin in there. So we have then when did Satoshi Nakamoto publish his white paper? Oh, about
Halloween.
October of 2008.
Not just
The
October, Halloween.
the exact month of the start of the financial crisis. Coincidence? No.
No.
So you bring that, and by the way, who's Satoshi Nakamoto? Still, we don't know.
He's a ghost.
He's never even sold one single Bitcoin of his stash.
He's a ghost.
He's a ghost. So what really is the whole purpose behind Bitcoin and cryptocurrency? And you know what? Bitcoin's been around since 2009. Why did it only really start becoming big in late 2016 and all of 2017? What was the push? Well, there's one thing that was missing that a lot of the analysts aren't talking about. In the middle of 2016, and just before Brexit, Larry Summers and Ken Rogoff came out and started pushing the elimination of cash. And then within 6 months, all of a sudden, cryptocurrencies exploded.
And
Digital
steal
money,
every
getting rid of
headline
cash.
worldwide. Steal every headline worldwide. Period.
Exactly. So, like I said, these things are not coincidences. When you start putting the things together over a timeline, the fact of the matter is there's one important thing about having access to physical cash. 80 to 85% of all transactions are done digitally. People are fine with digital money, but they want the confidence that if something happens, they can take their money out of a bank.
Right.
If they're no longer allowed to take their money, that's a removal of a freedom, and it's a removal of confidence. So this is, and of course, on the religious side, the Christians have always been feared of the mark of the beast and the one world monetary system and that type of thing. So you've got to desensitize people to do this. So how do you do it? You throw out these quote unquote decentralized forms of money that people can get rich on, because greed supersedes anything else in life. The love of money is the root of many evils. So you offer people the chance for greed. Now,
and you make it not only do you make a handful of people unbelievably wealthy, you get them to do your bidding by giving them a platform. We'll call it YouTube. We'll call it the internet. We'll call it whatever you want to call it. And we will begin having segments on every financial television network that discusses Bitcoin multiple times a day, brings it to the table. I've been calling it an assimilation play since day one. I mean, for all of 2017, I've actually penned about upwards of 20 different articles showing nothing but the what the banksters and the governments are doing and saying, and how they are responding and reacting, and supposedly to what's actually happening. I think that they're all behind it, but I think that's where you're headed with all of this.
Yeah, because it's fascinating. Because you think about the money. I always distill money. There's 7 attributes with money as opposed to currency and that. But I always attribute money to just one single axiom. It's an idea backed by confidence. It doesn't matter if it's seashells, if it's salt, if it's whatever, gold, whatever. It's an idea backed by confidence. The key word is confidence. Well, here's the thing. When you take a look at what most of those YouTube and that are talking about Bitcoin, what do they tell you? Oh, it's
Get
going to go to
rich.
$1 million.
Right. Get rich.
They don't tell you the underlying factors that the amount of electricity it takes to mine this stuff is growing exponentially now. The amount of fees, the transaction time in between, the processing time in between transactions. I know somebody, I think CJ was saying that he tried to sell some Bitcoin and it took more than 3 days for the transaction to finally process.
I've heard upwards of a week.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure in many cases. Well, here's the kicker now. We now have, most people don't realize, in the Tax Reform Act, it's got a section in there on how to deal with cryptocurrencies, taxation of cryptocurrencies. You're going to be taxed on every single transaction. Well, what are some of the Bitcoin advocates or the cryptocurrency advocates doing? They're teaching people how to day trade cryptocurrencies. Well, the blockchain does keep track of the transactions, but most of the exchanges don't give you a layout of all your purchases and sells. You have to now manually keep an Excel spreadsheet of every single transaction and the dollar value at the exact time that you made your trade, et cetera, et cetera. So the government doesn't have to try to kill. All they have to do is bring taxation, which is what they do on everything. Now, my opinion is that cryptocurrencies are going to be the future. My opinion is the blockchain is going to be the future of the monetary system, whether it's the Ethereum platform on the blockchain, but the blockchain in general. It's going to be the basis of the Russian, Chinese, the oil system. It's going to replace everything. Now, what I don't know is which of these decentralized cryptocurrencies are going to survive. But I do absolutely believe that whatever cryptocurrency becomes standardized, it's going to be resource backed, aka gold backed, oil backed, diamond backed, real estate backed. It's going to be backed by something.
Yes.
This frequency shift that we're seeing of populism and nationalism, most people don't remember from the French Revolution. Why did Robespierre get his head cut off? He was the leader of the revolution. Because when Robespierre and his little Jacobins took over the government, they started printing money and they created hyperinflation, which led to even worse things than Bastille Day. When Napoleon came in, guess what Napoleon did? He brought the nation back to a gold standard, and the economy flourished. This is in the populist movements. The return of resource-backed money or a gold standard of some type is almost mandatory.
Because that's where our human rights, our freedoms, liberties, justice, rule of law all begin. Period.
And
that's what most people don't understand, is the fact that when you can take cash, fold it over, put it in your wallet, that you are in fact folding over, putting in your wallet or in your pocket your individual human rights, sovereignty, and freedom right then and there, because you have the ability to move about freely, and you have the ability to move about and conduct conversations, conduct transactions with whomever, wherever, whenever you would like, period. When that is corrupted, which is what we have now, then you have issues. When that is corrupted, that's when people begin disappearing, and people like HRC are able to rise to a place of prominence, because there are two sets of laws right now. There are the laws that don't apply to HRC, and then there are the laws that do apply to you and me, period. Gold is is throughout all of history up to this point, gold has been the only asset commodity to rein that in. Are there others that have been able to? Yeah, but they don't have the history that gold does. Am I just way off base here?
No, because what gold also does is a checks and balance against government.
Exactly.
When the Roman government started clipping their coins, i.e., it was no longer 0.999, pure gold, when they started adding other alloys and lessening the amount of actual gold in the thing, inflation went in, hyperinflation, and it led to the economic destruction of their economy. Uh, the fact of the matter is that gold, in my opinion, the gold standard was flawed because um, you have to take into consideration that economic growth will always be greater than the amount of gold that you can actually mine from the ground. So in that instance, you can't set a fixed price for gold. We had gold at $35 an ounce all the way from 1933 to 1975. That doesn't work when you have innovation creating economic growth that far supersedes a fixed price of gold. You need to have gold that is flexible in its pricing. Okay, and that's why the Jim Rickards and that say $10,000 gold. Uh, um, who's Bill Holter and Jim Sinclair. Jim Sinclair believes $50,000. You got to make up for the fact that there's going to be monetary expansion due to the natural course of economic growth. What using gold as a backstop does is it halts the inflation that can run rampant during economic growth,
which is what we're experiencing right now.
We are about to see it in spades. That's why I truly believe it's been bottled up thanks to the Fed destroying money velocity and keeping all that expanded money up in the Wall Street and the banks.
Right.
It's not trickled down to the general economy. That's why there's been no high-paying jobs. This is why businesses aren't expanding. They're just buying back their stock. Well, once that cash doesn't disappear, the only way it disappears is if the Fed decides to buy up all the bonds and then retire the bonds without making the government pay for them. That will lessen the money supply and it'll create deflation. But the Keynesian mentality is you always have to have inflation, which destroys the purchasing power of your currency, like they really care, but it makes assets for their wealthy and who they really are there for much, much greater. And it's a wealth siphoning.
Exactly. It's a form of theft. That's all that it is. It's just it's theft
and gold
with
has been
multiple syllables.
If you go back and look at charts, you can do somebody can do a Google search of inflation between 1780 and 1913, and you'll see the line. The amount of inflation was just virtually stable, except for like during the Civil War and during a few economic crises. But everything was just like between 0 and 1% for over 100 years.
142 years to be exact, because this is part of the argument that I was making, or part of my the conversation I was having with Dr. Coates yesterday, is the fact that if we had that was the most prosperous and most the global economy expanded by more than any other time in human history because of the gold standard and the fact that the price of gold was stable and for 142 years. So
I will caveat that one way. Let's go back to 1492.
I'm talking about 1792 to 1913. I'm not concerned with 1492.
I'm going back to 1492 because that, of course, was when we opened up the New World. What primary metal came out of the New World? Silver.
Silver. And
silver was the basis of the monetary system for virtually everybody. From 1492 to 1893 or 1873, the Panic of 1873, I believe it was. And the Panic of 1873 was we went off the silver standard. And that was that big fight between William Jennings Bryan, the populist, "You shall not crucify mankind across gold." Who was it? I forget who was. McKinley. McKinley was big on the gold standard. That was a big fight because remember what I said about the fixed price of gold hampers economic growth? When we had silver as part of our monetary system, it allowed for the natural course of inflation, price inflation for the farmers, for this and that, and commodities as economic growth took place. When we pulled out silver, we created these panics because of liquidity.
Okay, then let's go back to the silver standard. I don't really
Exactly.
care.
Think
I,
about think about this. Every single major currency, the British pound, a pound of silver. The dollar, according to the Constitution, or at least the 1792 Currency Act,
yep.
was certain grains of silver. China's currency in the 1800s and that was silver. The pieces of eight, the Spanish, was silver.
That was
Silver was what drove the great from like 1492 to through the Industrial Revolution. Silver was the catalyst for the greatest economic growth ever in history. Now, we did expand that with the gold supply, but unfortunately, it was also a combination of central banks starting to expand the monetary supply at a time when technology and innovation exploded. So you have two. You could almost separate it from 1492 to 1873, and then from also within that 1790 in the United States to 1913. So you have two separate things. One is a gold standard, the other was a silver standard intermixed in that. And you almost could say the gold standard was the domestic growth and the silver standard was international trade.
Then let's have silver in a basket or in some type of monetary in our monetary system, whether it's domestic, globally. I mean, I know that silver's been money longer than gold, and what you just said makes perfect sense. And I think that that's part of what gets overlooked. I know that I've certainly been overlooking it because the dollar, before the Federal Reserve got a hold of it, was based on the pieces of eight. It was based on that calculation. That
Right, it
was,
was the
number
Spanish
of
dollar.
grains and so forth. Exactly, it was the
We
Spanish
called it the
dollar.
dollar because it was a morphing in the U.S. of the Spanish dollar based on grains of silver.
Well, then let's go back to the silver standard.
Silver Standard was much better at halting inflation than gold was. But gold really, like I said, domestically when we went to gold standard, there was that hindrance. It did limit the ability of price inflation because during the Industrial Revolution, growth was much faster than the amount of gold we could pull out of the ground,
Right.
and
And it
it led
always will be.
right, right. And gold is the money of kings, and silver is the money of commerce.
Well, there you go. That's what we need.
And I think what's going to happen though is because of industrial growth, silver will always have a monetary basis, but the amount of technology we're going to have going in the future, silver is going to be good as gold, but it's going to be used for industrial uh, industry. Gold is, of course, going to be backing. I think oil is still going to play a part in this. That's one of the reasons why China is doing the yuan-denominated oil contract. By the way, one of the things that we talked about the different gold markets. There was a under the radar move that was made that opens up this entire thing and makes it feasible. In China, if you go to the Shanghai Gold Exchange and you buy gold, you can't remove it from China,
Right.
but you can now because they about a month ago, Shenzhen, not Shanghai, but Shenzhen gold market connected itself to Hong Kong. And what is Hong Kong? Hong Kong is like a portal to the world. It's neutral in many aspects. You can buy gold through Hong Kong and you can deliver it and take it wherever you want. Now with the connection to Shenzhen, gold that is in China, you can buy it in Hong Kong from Shenzhen, have it delivered to Hong Kong, and then take it wherever you want to go. And that suddenly internationalized gold delivery around the world. And that's what's going to make the gold backing of the yuan denominated oil contract feasible. Because now countries can buy gold through the futures market in Hong Kong and Shenzhen, not necessarily through Shanghai.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
Bingo.
And that's what's happening. And I think that the nationalism, populism, whatever you want to call it, the uprising that we see from the people, that the nations that are recognizing or that do recognize their citizens and that their citizens matter, those nations are going to flourish. The
By the
nations
way,
that are like that you and I, like the United States, like the UK, some of the most of the European nations that don't recognize, don't respect their citizens, well, they're in for some changes.
one of my predictions for 2018, 2019, 2020 is going to be a sea change, um, where we had the BRICS emerge following the 2008 financial crisis.
Yep.
The ones that are going to emerge as not only technological centers, innovation centers, but also some of the best growth that you will see over the next 3 years is going to be Eastern Europe, Poland, Estonia, Belarus,
Kazakhstan.
Kazakhstan. They are already working to
Yep.
become the Silicon Valley of the Central Asia and Eastern Europe. That's going to be the growth because they're open and free as opposed to the EU,
Right.
which you have to follow. Everybody's got to follow the same draconian regulations and that in trade. These are open. Think of Estonia. You can become a digital citizen of Estonia. They are buying in full bore on cryptocurrencies, but they're also bringing in technology companies to be the Silicon Valley of the East. And is it any wonder you pull the Silk Road into Estonia? Now
Right.
all of a sudden it's boom. So the emerging markets that are going to come, in my opinion, are going to be that Eastern Europe, Central Asia block. Many of the former Soviet states,
Right.
freedom has just blossomed, and they're
Blossom.
going to have the connection to Eurasian Economic Union,
Yep.
the ASEAN and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as well as the Silk Road.
All of it. They're right in the thick of it. They are all of those economic alliances that you just listed. Every one of them. That's the target. They are the target. You know, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan are two of the countries that I've been following and paying a little closer attention to because of what these two nations are doing. I mean, Kyrgyzstan currently is still operate their number one currency is cattle. And the minister of the central bank said, we got to stop this and we're going to set it up to where we're going to make it easy. We're going to change all of our policies and we need for you guys to stop this and to start moving towards gold. And I would like to encourage everybody to have 100 grams of gold and stop trading in cattle because that's their number one currency. So when you have that type of a situation, I mean, and this is not to say that this is some backwoods, nation of complete idiots. They're just an agrarian community, and they and cows are a big deal. So that's their currency, and so that's a nation that I personally am following, and what I want to see how this progress that they have planned, how that unfolds, and then Kazakhstan, they're just huge. This nation is a nation on the move. They and I really started paying attention to them about 3 years ago when the director of finance went to the Shanghai Gold Exchange for the specific purpose to discuss how gold was going to be used along the Silk Road as trade settlement. And when that meeting happened, it was like, okay, these guys are in the thick of it. And if you look at them geographically, they are the border that divides Russia and China. Kazakhstan is the country that creates that border. I mean, it's really unbelievable. They're the position that they are in and what they bring to the table. It's and
You
they're
know what's
go ahead.
what there's an interesting thing about those countries. Many of them have a large population, if not are
Yep.
predominantly Muslim. Malaysia, Indonesia. Okay, a lot of these have had economic booms, while the Middle East, which has lived under the Wahhabism and the 7th century type Islam, have pretty much they've gotten rich only at the top, with the monarchies and the aristocracy, but the people have not flourished. While a lot of these other predominantly Muslim countries that are in Central Asia as well as the Pacific Rim, they have expanded, grown, they've had innovation. This is something that Saudi Arabia, I think, is finally waking up to, where they're going to expand beyond just oil. I think Syria and Iran, when Russia and China really get full bore into there, they're going to suddenly become innovators and modernized. And when you do that, and you start bringing wealth to the people,
Right.
you are going to see a pullback on the radical Islam. And to tell the truth, if you go back, most of radical Islam is primarily based on the Lawrence of Arabia theory, where the Western countries and governments have really been the ones who funding, arming, and pushing it. It hasn't necessarily been homegrown type of jihad or radical Islam. It's been almost all funded and pushed by Western intelligence agencies. Well, you get them out of the mix, and all of a sudden, a lot of this terrorism that goes by the wayside because they're focusing on economics.
Right. Once again, goes back to exactly what I was saying a minute ago. When you take currency, you fold it over, you put it in your pocket, and it's not corrupted, everything changes. Your entire world changes, and people become more focused on taking care of their family, taking care of their community, how they can be innovative and taking and growing their personal wealth, and all of these. Everything changes. Everything. And if your currency is corrupt, everything else has to become corrupt. And what we're dealing with and have been dealing with in the United States and around the world since 1913 is the hijacking of the Federal Reserve note, or the US dollar, that morphed into the Federal Reserve note, and it is 100% corrupt. It became corrupt January 23rd, 1913, and the corruption has just grown exponentially in order to cover up the lie that the currency tells. That's the bottom line. That's how these people come out of these draconian dystopian worlds and enter back into a world where they are free, is by economic growth, by having a currency that's not corrupt, by having the ability to take care of their own community, to take care of their family. That's it. That's all that people want, really. I mean, when you get right down to it, that's all we want. I mean, I'm not asking too much.
Amen. Amen. And you know what? That's the thing about it is the powers that be can control these things for a certain amount of time. You know what?
Right.
Even a century. But just as there was an interview I was listening to, I think his last name was Cullum, and he said that it's a law of nature that everything reverts back to the mean.
There you go. That's
When the
that's where we're
stock
headed.
market crashed in 2008, it went from 14,000 at its high in 2007 to 6,600.
Yep.
Same thing now. If everything is artificially expanded, whether it's housing prices, whether it's stock market, whether it's suppressed gold prices, everything eventually reverts back to the mean. And anything that's suppressed springs back to its correct price. Everything that's been inflated falls down to its correct price. And
Yep.
so we're going to see that all across the board.
Yep. I think once again, more sooner than later. So,
I agree.
well, Ken, This has been awesome. I think it's a great way to start the new year, and I hope that we can do this again in the not too distant future. And I hope that we have a great many more of these conversations throughout the year, because I think 2018 is going to be a very interesting year.
Absolutely. And everybody out there, have a great, happy new year. And yeah, I think this is going to be a fantastic year.
I do too. And been speaking with Ken Shortgen Jr., and you can find all of Ken's great work over at thedailyeconomist.com. And you can find him on YouTube, and his YouTube channel is of the same name. And Ken, you're on social media all over the place as well, right?
Yeah, Twitter, just go to @FinanceExaminer, and you can find me on Facebook. And I have a Facebook group called The Daily Economist. You can join that as well.
Sounds great. Well, Ken, thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, and we'll talk with you soon.
You got it.